The crash of glass silenced the ballroom. A champagne flute had slipped from the bride's mother's hand, shattering at her feet. All eyes turned, not to her, but to the groom. "You think you can marry into our family?" the bride's uncle barked, stepping forward, his face red with rage. "Do you even know what a billion-dollar wedding looks like? Men like you don't belong here." The crowd gasped as two groomsmen shoved the black groom back against the marble pillar. His tuxedo jacket crumpled under their fists, but his expression never broke. Calm, silent, unshaken. "Say something, boy. Show us you're worth anything more than scraps." The groom straightened his tie with slow precision, his eyes burning with quiet defiance. He scanned the sea of sneers, the laughter echoing through the golden hall. And in that moment, no one knew the truth. The man they tried to humiliate wasn't just any groom. He was the billionaire CEO whose signature could bankrupt every single person in that room before dessert was served. And tonight, he was done staying silent.
The groom's fingers lingered on the knot of his tie, smoothing it as if he were preparing for a board meeting rather than standing accused in a gilded ballroom. The chandeliers above cast golden light over faces twisted in disdain. The bride's family, rows of jewel-draped relatives, looked on with smug amusement. The bride, Emma, stood frozen, her knuckles white against the lace bouquet she held. Her lips parted as though to speak, but her mother's hand clamped down on her wrist. "Don't," the older woman hissed. "Not here. Not for him." The groom, David, met her eyes for only a second. Emma's chest rose and fell with a trembling breath, but she said nothing. She was drowning under the weight of her family's expectations, too weak or too afraid to throw him a lifeline. The uncle who had barked at him earlier stepped closer, his cologne thick and suffocating. He was a heavy man, wrapped in an expensive Italian tuxedo, his belly stretching the buttons. His voice boomed again. "Do you even know what it means to marry a Langford?" His finger jabbed into David's chest. "This family built empires, while yours," he paused, sneering, "while yours scrubbed floors." Laughter erupted from the cousins, their champagne glasses raised like weapons. One of them mimicked scrubbing with an imaginary mop, drawing louder chuckles. David remained still. His silence was mistaken for shame. The bride's mother seized the moment. "This wedding," she said, her voice cold and sharp as glass, "wasn't supposed to happen. We gave Emma every chance to come to her senses, but clearly—" her eyes flicked to the groom's wrinkled tuxedo, the scuffed leather of his shoes. "She is determined to drag us into the gutter." Emma flinched. "Mother, please." "Quiet!" The word cracked like a whip. "Not here. Not for him." A groomsman, the bride's cousin, towering and broad, stepped forward and shoved David again. His back hit the marble pillar with a dull thud. A murmur rippled through the crowd, not of sympathy, but of eager anticipation. Wealth feeds on spectacle. David adjusted his cufflinks, brushing away invisible dust. His knuckles whitened where his hand clenched, but his face betrayed nothing. Another cousin smirked. "Careful with his suit, Harry. It probably took him a year to save up for the rental." More laughter. The bride's father finally rose from his seat at the head table. He was a man carved from granite, his white hair swept back, his presence commanding. Silence fell instantly. "Enough," he said, though his tone carried no defense for David, only disappointment. His gaze lingered on Emma. "I warned you, daughter. Marrying beneath you is the greatest mistake of your life. And now the whole city will see." His eyes cut to David, piercing. "You've brought shame into this house." David straightened, his jaw tightening. Still, He said nothing. The father gestured to the musicians, who had long abandoned their instruments in favor of watching the unfolding drama. "Play," he ordered, as though music could plaster over the growing rift. But no violin dared strike a note. Instead, a cousin at the back raised his glass. "To the groom," he shouted mockingly. "May his pockets be as deep as his silence." The hall roared with laughter again. Glasses clinked. A chant began, low at first, then swelling. "Speech! Speech! Speech!" The uncle grabbed David by the arm, dragging him toward the stage where the microphone stood. "Yes, boy, show us what you're made of. Give us the speech of your life." He shoved him forward. David stumbled, but caught himself. He gripped the edge of the podium, his knuckles pale against the polished wood. The microphone squealed. The entire hall leaned forward, waiting for the man they believed to be powerless to speak.
For a heartbeat, David allowed the silence to stretch. His eyes swept the room, the sneering cousins, the icy mother, the father whose face was a mask of authority. And then he smiled, a calm, measured smile that unsettled more than any outburst would have. "I'll speak," he said softly. His voice carried, steady as steel, but not yet. The crowd stirred with confusion. Murmurs rippled. "Arrogant," someone muttered. "Coward," another hissed. The uncle snatched the microphone from him. "Pathetic," he spat. "This is what you've chosen, Emma? A man who can't even speak for himself?" Emma's hands shook, her bouquet slipping from her fingers. Petals scattered across the marble floor like silent witnesses. The humiliation continued. Plates of untouched lobster cooled on the tables, champagne warmed in crystal glasses, but no one moved to eat. The true feast was David's disgrace, and the family devoured it greedily. One cousin, emboldened by the silence, swaggered forward. He held up his phone, its camera recording. "Smile for the world, Groom," he sneered. "Let's make this go viral. #BrokeGroom." Laughter exploded again. Phones appeared, lenses capturing the moment of degradation. The bride's mother raised her glass once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her tone dripping with triumph, "I give you tonight's entertainment, the man who thought he could buy love with nothing in his pockets." The room thundered with applause and cruel laughter. Even the chandeliers seemed to shake from the force of it. David stood there, unmoving. His silence stretched longer, his restraint a puzzle none of them could solve. What they didn't know, what not one of them suspected, was that every second of their laughter, every insult hurled, every shove and shove recorded on camera was building toward the moment he had chosen. Not a moment sooner, not a moment later. Because when he finally spoke, when the truth finally shattered their arrogance, it wouldn't just silence the ballroom. It would end them. The uncle smirked as the laughter swelled. "See?" he bellowed, raising his hands like a conductor commanding an orchestra. "The whole room agrees. You don't belong here, boy. Not in this family, not in this hall." David remained rooted where he stood, shoulders squared, his gaze steady on the sea of mocking faces. The hall that had been gilded with roses, silk, and crystal for his union with Emma now felt more like an arena where every sneer was a weapon and every laugh a strike. The bride's mother leaned in, her voice carrying through the mic as if she had claimed it for herself. "Do you see now, Emma? Do you see the shame you've brought upon us?" Emma's lips trembled, but no words came. Her mascaraed eyes darted helplessly between her mother and David. A cousin, drunk on champagne and cruelty, lurched forward with a smirk. "Careful! Don't cry, Emma. He might not afford the tissues." More laughter. Phones rose higher, recording. The hashtag had already been born. In the corners of the hall, whispers turned into gleeful commentary. This will be all over Instagram by morning. Wait until the tabloids pick this up. Poor girl, tied herself to a beggar. The bride's uncle seized David's wrist, lifting his hand high in mock triumph. Ladies and gentlemen, behold, the groom who can't even pay for his own wedding. Shall we pass the hat around, collect some coins for his honeymoon? A roar of approval shook the walls. A few guests even reached into their pockets, flinging crumpled bills onto the stage. Notes fluttered to the floor at David's feet, a grotesque parody of confetti. David's eyes lowered briefly to the scattered money. His jaw tightened. His silence grew heavier, colder. But the family mistook it, again, for weakness. One cousin elbowed another. "Watch this." He pulled a crisp bill from his wallet, walked forward, and tried to stuff it into David's breast pocket. "Here you go, champ. A tip for making us laugh." Gasps and chuckles rippled across the room. The bill hung awkwardly, poking from the pocket like an insult stitched into his tuxedo. Still, David said nothing. The bride's mother raised her glass. "Oh, this is too rich. The mighty groom, reduced to charity on his wedding night." She turned toward the guests. "What will the papers say tomorrow? Heiress marries pauper. I'll make sure the headline sings." Emma finally broke, her voice trembling. "Mother, stop it!" she cried, stepping forward. Her father's glare cut her down before she could say more. "You will be silent, or you will not bear our name another day." Emma froze, her face crumbling with tears she refused to let fall. The humiliation deepened. A young cousin took the microphone and began to speak in a mocking sing-song tone. "Once upon a time, a poor boy thought he could marry into a castle. He wore borrowed shoes, a rented tux, and carried dreams in empty pockets. And what did the princess say? She said yes, because she was blind." The hall roared, stamping their feet, clapping their hands. "Encore! Encore!" they shouted.
The cousin bowed low. Thank you. Don't forget to tip the groom." He blew a kiss to David and strutted off, collapsing into hysterics among his siblings. David's hand clenched tighter on the podium. He inhaled slowly, letting the sound of their cruelty roll over him like waves. Every word, every jeer, every laugh, he stored it away, quiet as stone. The bride's father motioned to the band. "Play something," he ordered again, desperate to control the chaos. But even the musicians avoided their instruments, their faces pale. Because there was something in David's silence now, something heavier than shame, sharper than humiliation. It was the kind of silence that unsettled even the cruel. Still, they pressed on. A cousin lifted his glass. "You know what this man's vows should be?" He cleared his throat, lowering his voice in a mock-serious tone. "I vow to borrow. I vow to beg. I vow to forever live off my wife's family fortune." Roars of approval. Someone even clapped him on the back. The bride's mother laughed so hard her pearl necklace shook. "Oh, stop! You'll kill me." A waiter, carrying a tray of champagne, passed too close. One cousin snatched a flute and thrust it into David's hand. "Here, drink up, pauper. At least for tonight you can taste wealth." Another cousin pushed the glass back against his lips. "Drink! Show us you're man enough." The champagne spilled down his chin, staining the crisp white shirt beneath his tuxedo. Gasps turned into howls of laughter. Phones zoomed in, capturing every drop. David lowered the glass slowly, his hands steady. He set it back on the tray without a word, his silence thicker than the spilled champagne soaking into his clothes. The uncle leaned in close, sneering. "Why don't you run back to wherever you came from? Leave before we drag you out." The crowd murmured approval. Someone shouted, "Yes, throw him out!" David's eyes swept the hall once more. He looked at Emma, her trembling frame, her tear-bright eyes pleading silently for him to endure. He did not move. Instead, he tugged at his cufflink, the golden edge catching the chandelier light. Slowly, deliberately, he checked his watch. A timepiece so understated, so unassuming that none of them noticed. But soon, they would. For now, the ridicule deepened. The bride's father rose to his feet once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it has turned into a lesson." He gestured toward David. "A lesson in why one does not cross the boundaries of class, why one does not attempt to marry above his station." The applause erupted. Guests nodded. The mother's lips curled in triumph. Emma's shoulders shook as tears finally slid down her cheeks. David watched her, the faintest flicker of softness crossing his face. Then, it was gone. The bride's father raised his glass. "To the Langfords," he declared, "who will endure this shame and erase it in time." "To the Langfords," the crowd chorused, glasses raised high. Every word struck like a lash. Every cheer pressed heavier. And David took it all. Every jeer, every shove, every mocking toast. Because he knew something none of them did. The real lesson of the night hadn't begun.
The uncle, still flushed with drink and power, leaned over the podium and spat his words like venom. "Look at him, standing there like a statue. What's the matter, boy? No words left? Or are you afraid if you open your mouth, the truth will spill out?" The crowd murmured with curiosity, feeding on his provocation. "The truth," the uncle went on, his voice dripping with disdain, "that you have nothing, no name, no fortune, no legacy, just a cheap suit and a dream too big for your shoulders." He jabbed David in the chest with two thick fingers. This is the man who thought he could marry Emma Langford, my niece. A Langford, as if a pauper's blood could ever run with ours." The hall erupted in cruel laughter once more. The sound was deafening, a wave of contempt that beat against David's calm face. Emma took a step forward, her lips trembling. "Uncle, please." "Quiet, Emma," the uncle barked, silencing her with a glare sharp enough to slice glass. The bride's mother, pearls gleaming against her throat, turned to her husband with a smirk. "Darling, perhaps we should cancel this farce now. Better to end it before our name becomes a headline for ridicule." The father's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around his glass. "Perhaps we should," he said coldly. "A union built on lies cannot stand." The groomsmen, two broad-shouldered cousins, closed in again. One shoved David squarely in the chest, forcing him back against the pillar. "You hear that?" the cousin sneered. "Maybe you should take the hint and walk away. Save yourself further embarrassment." Phones hovered higher, recording every shove, every word. The hashtag #BrokeGroom was already flooding feeds. Smirks spread as guests whispered about the online humiliation. One cousin, emboldened, grabbed the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a mock flourish, "shall we see what kind of wallet our groom carries?" He lunged toward David's pocket, trying to snatch it out. A ripple of gasps filled the hall as he yanked free a slim black leather wallet and held it up like a trophy. "Shall we count the pennies?" he laughed, flipping it open. To his disappointment, the wallet was nearly empty. Just a license, a few cards, and a single crisp bill. The cousin pulled the bill free and held it aloft. "Behold, his fortune!" He crumpled it into a ball and tossed it into the crowd. Laughter boomed as guests scrambled mockingly to catch it, as though it were a bouquet. David's eyes narrowed briefly, but he made no move to reclaim it. He only smoothed his lapel again, his composure unbroken. The bride's mother's lips curled into a triumphant smile. "Pathetic," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "And this is the man you swore to marry, Emma?" Emma's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. She looked at David, her eyes filled with silent apology, but her lips refused to move against her family. Another cousin, this one younger, drunker, stumbled onto the stage with a grin. He held up a serving tray like a shield. "I propose a game," he shouted. "Let's collect donations for the groom. Who's with me?" The crowd cheered. Guests began tossing coins, bills, even napkins onto the tray. The clatter echoed like cruel applause. "Pass it around," someone yelled. "Let's see if we can fund his honeymoon." The tray made its way around the hall, filling with scraps of money, mocking notes scrawled on cocktail napkins, and even a packet of sugar tossed in jest. When it returned to the stage, it overflowed with ridicule. The young cousin dumped the contents at David's feet. The bills scattered like ashes, the coins rolling across the marble floor. "There you go," he said with a grin. "Your dowry, groom." The hall erupted in laughter so loud it rattled the chandeliers. David stood still, his eyes flicking briefly to the mess at his feet. He bent slowly, deliberately, not to gather the money, but to straighten the cuff of his trousers. His movements were precise, composed, almost regal. And that composure made them angrier.
One cousin snarled. "What's the matter? Too proud to pick it up?" "Thought so. Pride's the only thing you've got, and it's worth less than those coins." A guest, an older aunt with a sharp tongue, stood and pointed a jeweled finger at him. "Emma, if you go through with this, you'll regret it until your dying breath. That man will never provide. He will drag you into poverty, and we will not save you. Do you hear me? We will cut you off." Emma's bouquet trembled in her hands. She opened her mouth, but her father's booming voice cut across her hesitation. "You will not answer," he commanded. "You will obey your family, or you will be cast out." The room thundered in approval. The Langfords had spoken. And still, David said nothing. The uncle, frustrated by his silence, sneered, "What kind of man lets himself be stripped and mocked without a word? Speak, boy, defend yourself." The microphone was thrust toward him again. The crowd leaned in, breath held, waiting for him to break, waiting for him to beg or shout or crumble. David looked at the microphone, then at the crowd. His lips parted, but instead of words, he let out the faintest chuckle. Low, dangerous, the kind of laugh that unsettled rather than amused. It froze the room for a second, just a second. Then the mother snapped, "He laughs because he's a fool. Don't let him distract you." "Speech! Speech!" the crowd chanted again, louder this time, desperate to tear something from him. The uncle shoved the mic into his chest. "Say something, damn you!" David's hand closed over the microphone at last. He lifted it, slowly, calmly. His voice, when it came, was quiet, measured, unhurried. "I'll speak," he said. A hush fell over the ballroom, but not yet. He placed the microphone back on the podium and stepped away. His silence spoke louder than their jeers. His composure, his restraint, his refusal to crack, it was beginning to unsettle them, though they refused to admit it. Phones still filmed, the family still smirked, but beneath it, unease crept in.
because humiliation only works when the victim breaks, and David had not broken. Not yet. But the Langfords weren't finished. They were determined to shatter him. The bride's father raised his glass again, his voice cutting through the tension. To Emma, may she one day forgive herself for the greatest mistake of her life. The hall echoed back, to Emma! Emma's tears finally spilled. They ran down her cheeks unchecked, glistening in the chandelier light. She looked at David, pleading, desperate, ashamed, and still he stood, calm as stone. The humiliation had reached its zenith. The crowd had exhausted every weapon: mockery, money, shoves, cruel games. All that remained was the silence David wrapped around himself like armor. And soon, very soon, that silence would explode into truth.
They had burned through every petty cruelty, every practiced sneer, and still the room burned on. Now the Langfords began to devour themselves. A ripple of unease trickled through the crowd when one of the guests, an influencer with 500,000 followers, leaned forward and, instead of laughing, widened his eyes. He whispered into his phone, and the camera stayed live. Within minutes, a grainy feed of the ballroom, the mockery, and the stunned bride was making its slow, inevitable way into the wild. Comments popped up like wasps: pity, outrage, disbelief. The hashtags multiplied. The laughter that had felt safe on polished floors suddenly had an audience the family could not control. "Don't let that thing ruin the night," the bride's mother hissed, slapping the phone out of the influencer's hand. It was clumsy, theatrical, exactly the sort of gesture the camera loved. The feed had already captured the slap. Someone in the front row, who'd been quiet until now, Aunt Marianne, known for her charity bracelets and immaculate social feeds, stood up abruptly. Her face, usually powdered to perfection, had flushed an angry red. "This is obscene," she said, but the words tumbled out in a tremor. You can't be seen doing this." Her voice, aimed at her own kin, sounded like a crack in crystal. The father's jaw worked. He shot her a look that tried to punish insubordination with a glance. "Sit down, Marianne," he commanded. "We handle this." "Handle it?" she shot back. "You think the papers won't run this? They won't just run it, they'll brand us as monsters." She smoothed a trembling hand over her skirt, more concerned about the stain of scandal than the stain of shame. The seeds of panic were sprouting. A private message pinged across someone's phone, quick, terrified texts. The cousin who'd started the donation joke read the screen and paled. "It's everywhere," he muttered. "The clip is already—" He swallowed. It's trending." "Then do something," the mother snarled, but her voice had lost the iron edge. For the first time, her control felt brittle. A waiter, overhearing, faltered on his tray. Outside, headlights flashed as a few cars pulled up, paparazzi drawn by one reckless tweet. They were still outsiders, voices distant, but their presence thudded against the thin walls of the ballroom like a promise of exposure. The uncle, fraying, tried to stage a rescue of his dominance. He stepped up again, swaggering to the podium, and attempted to make a show of it. "This is a private affair," he barked into the mic, but his voice carried no court. The live stream captured that too, the angry man asserting privacy into a world that no longer knew the meaning of the word. A bridesmaid positioned near the stage snapped pictures herself, her fingers shaking. She turned them toward Emma, mouthing, "Run." Emma's face crumpled. Her father, seeing this, slammed a palm on the table. "Enough!" he roared so hard a chandelier trembled. The force of his anger was a brittle, desperate thing. It did not put out flames, it only scattered embers. A younger cousin, drunk and reckless, remembered an old family secret and chose the wrong moment to weaponize it. "Do you remember Aunt Marianne's little scandal?" he slurred, leaning toward a cluster of cousins. "Oh, come on, who cares? She only got that charity gig because she slept with—" He named a politician.
The name landed like a thrown dish, shattering decorum. Gasps, a few hasty coughs, then the chorus of later. Who told him that? Don't bring that up. The family's quiet skeletons were rattling in their wardrobes. At that, Aunt Marianne moved with a speed that belied her polished exterior. She snapped back at the cousin, the words sharp and vicious. How dare you? She launched into the sort of public attack that made people step back. Accusations, old slights, whispered resentments that had nothing to do with David and everything to do with the family's rotten core. Voices layered over voices. Names were thrown like knives. Someone who had been quiet until now, an older uncle, half in the shadows, stood. He had always been the one to smooth over scandals, to call in favors and fix things. But he looked drained, his face hollowed by years of compromises. "This is why I warned you," he muttered to the family. But the family didn't listen. They were too busy hurling, and the hurling had become aimless and fierce. A fight flared in the balcony between two cousins over an insult about inheritances. It began as a shove, and then hands grabbed collars. A woman screamed. In minutes, security, celebrity event security trained for spilled wine and wardrobe malfunctions, was trying to yank bodies apart. The photographer, who'd been documenting every angle, cursed under his breath as a flashbulb was knocked to the floor and shattered. The sound of broken glass in the echoing hall was a second, harsher punctuation to the original crash at the start of the night. "Call the band," someone ordered. "Play something." The musicians, weary and pale, took up violins and flutes and hit a rearranged, urgent piece meant to block out the noise, to call order. But the music only underscored the chaos, an orchestral wallpaper over a house cracking at the seams. Meanwhile, the online clips multiplied. The influencer's live stream had been reposted across platforms, accompanied by captions that framed the Langfords' cruelty as something monstrous. Outsiders who hadn't even been at the wedding weighed in. Celebrities, activists, strangers who smelled injustice like blood. Public opinion, which had been sitting quietly on the sidelines, began to form and harden. For every comment that mocked David, there were 3 furious replies condemning the family. The balance of power shifted in likes and shares, and the family felt it like a physical force. The wedding planner, a woman who had prided herself on flawless evenings and immaculate guest lists, had been watching with hollow eyes. She paled, checking her phone, then the contract, then the stage. "This is a liability. I can't." Her hands fluttered as she imagined the lawsuits, the canceled bookings, the reputational wreckage. She began to gather her notebooks. The assistants took the cue and slipped away, their heels a soft staccato on the marble as they exited. "Don't be ridiculous," the mother snapped, but there was nowhere for the planner to stay. Contracts were signed, clauses invoked, insurers called. The word cancel made its slow, ugly crawl across someone's lips. A server at the far end quietly shut down a drinks cart and, without fanfare, slipped out the back door. A journalist, an uninvited one paying to get past the valet, had managed to worm into a corner by the dessert table. He was live typing furiously into his recorder, voice low, but his fingers fast. He knew the scent of a story that would sell. Privilege unmasked, cruelty exposed, a public humiliation with faces to match. His notes would be the opening paragraph of tomorrow's headline. Inside, the family's facade was crumbling in ways that had nothing to do with David. Old slights and present panic bled together. The father, whose iron had always been reputation, found his telephone buzzing with calls from lawyers. The mother's friends, those same women who had clapped and toasted, now avoided her glance. The cousin who had dared to get physical with David's wallet found himself pulled aside by a man in a silk suit who had been in the shadows all night, a bank partner perhaps, or an investor. The whisper between them was sharp. The man's expression was a map of displeasure. "Do you know who you're tangling with?" he hissed. On the stage, a guest, someone with a reputation for a hot temper, rose, lips white. She approached the uncle as if to strike him for the way he'd treated David. But before her hand fell, the uncle grabbed the microphone again and bellowed about dignity and order and the family name. His voice cracked with something like grief at being defied. "How can you all?"
he rasped, but no one rallied to him. Instead, some guests shifted to the exits, their coats rising like a wash of pale sails. Emma stood at the center of this collapsing circus, a figure split in two. Sometimes she swung toward her family, repeating the words she'd been taught since childhood, that lineage and obedience and the careful maintenance of a name mattered above all. Other times she looked at David with a rawness that made people uncomfortable. It was as if she could see the dignity in him and the ugliness in her kin at the same time, and it was tearing her apart. Her hands left the bouquet for long seconds at a time, then returned. Her breath came in ragged pulls.
At the far end of the room, one of David's friends, quiet, composed, the type who never sought notice, could no longer contain himself. He rose slowly and walked toward the fray, eyes fixed on the men who'd shoved David. "That's enough," he said, his voice low. It was not a plea, it was a line in the sand. A groomsman laughed at him. "And who are you to tell us?" he sneered. The friend's face didn't change. "A man with standards," he replied. "Unlike some people here." The insult was a single, precise blade. The cousin who'd been enjoying himself laughed and then suddenly shoved the friend. The shove became a scuffle. Glass toppled. Someone screamed. Security stepped in with force now. 2 men in black jackets moved to separate bodies. A guest, the same one who'd earlier tried to push David off the stage, found himself shoved aside so hard he knocked into the cake table. Frosting splattered like marine spray. A fork clattered. The room went still for a single, suspended heartbeat. Then the cameras loved it. The silence that followed was not the composed, dangerous silence David owned. It was a brittle, terrified quiet. Outside, the paparazzi's cameras clicked. Inside, the family stared at each other, wounded and stunned by how quickly the night had pivoted. The scene had shifted from humiliation to spectacle, no longer only their mockery, but their unraveling splashed across feeds and whispered phone calls. David, still immaculate in his rented tux, that now bore a glimmer of spilled champagne along the cuff, looked on. He did not move to claim the frosting-stamped cake or to pull Emma away. He watched the people who had tried to humiliate him begin to betray themselves. Their cruelty had turned inward. In their scrambling to save face, they only exposed more. Bruised egos, whispered betrayals, petty jealousies plastered across a gilded hall. For a few seconds, minutes, there was nothing left to do but watch the Langfords implode. Every insult they had flung now ricocheted, hitting each other. Their alliances dissolved into argument and grievance. The dinner fell into a disordered hum of people choosing sides or leaving. And in the middle of it all, David inhaled as if measuring the air. He did not tighten his jaw or storm off. He did not clam up. He simply observed, quiet and deliberate, like a man listening for the exact second when the world should stop beating against him. That second, the one he was waiting for, had not yet arrived, but it was close enough to taste. He straightened his shoulders and stepped forward, not yet to the microphone, but toward the crowd, an unreadable movement. The room, already raw, shifted its attention back onto him, hungry, frightened, certain that the breaking would finally come. He smiled then, but it was not a smile to charm. It was the small, patient curl of a man who had watched a thing fall apart and who knew precisely where the foundation had been eaten away. "Now," someone whispered in the front row, as if the word could force him to speak. "Now, say something." David's hand settled on the podium, fingers splayed over the polished wood. He closed his eyes for a single beat, and the ballroom inhaled with him, waiting for the thunder that would come next.
The podium seemed to hum beneath his touch, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. The ballroom's chaos ebbed into silence, not because anyone wanted to give him the floor, but because there was nothing left to say. The insults had run their course. The jeers had soured into unease. Even cruelty has a breaking point, and they had reached it. David's eyes swept the hall. He saw Emma, tear-streaked and trembling. He saw the mother clutching her pearls like armor,
the father gripping his glass like a sword, the uncle still red with drink and rage. He saw cousins shifting uncomfortably, their bravado cracking under the weight of exposure. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that didn't need to rise to be heard. "You've all had your fun," he said, his words slicing clean through the silence. "You've mocked me, shoved me, poured drinks on me. You've passed around trays like beggars collecting scraps." A murmur rippled. He leaned closer to the microphone. "And yet, in all your laughter, you never once asked who I am." The uncle snorted, trying to recover dominance. "We know who you are. You're nobody. You're—" "Wrong," David said sharply, and the single word cracked like a whip. The room stilled again. He adjusted his cufflinks, letting the silence breathe, then continued. "You see a man in a rented tuxedo and decide he's beneath you. You see a black man marrying into your family and decide he's a mistake. You see silence and mistake it for weakness." His gaze sharpened, pinning the mother first. "But here's the truth you refused to see. The man you tried to humiliate tonight, the man you called a pauper, could buy and sell this entire ballroom without blinking." Gasps rippled. Some laughed nervously as if it must be a joke. The mother's lips curled, hissed. David smiled, but it was not warm. It was precise, dangerous. "You want proof? Fine." He reached into his inside pocket and withdrew a phone, sleek, unassuming, but glowing with notifications. He tapped once. The ballroom's massive projector screen, meant for the couple's wedding montage, flickered to life. A logo appeared, bold, recognizable. The kind of logo seen on skyscrapers in New York, on glass towers in London, on tech campuses in Silicon Valley.
Gasps turned to silence. A few guests nearly dropped their glasses. David's voice carried steady over the stunned crowd. "I am David Reed, CEO and majority shareholder of Reed Technologies, a company valued last quarter at $87 billion. Our software runs in your offices, on your phones, in your homes. The very Wi-Fi powering this hall tonight? Mine." The uncle staggered back. No, that's impossible," David finished for him. "You think a billionaire has to look like you, dress like you, beg for your approval like you." His eyes swept the room, pinning them all in their seats. "That's why none of you saw me for who I am. And that blindness? That arrogance? It's the most expensive mistake you've ever made." On the screen, headlines began to flash. Forbes covers, Wall Street Journal articles, photographs of David standing with world leaders, shaking hands with CEOs, cutting ribbons at global summits. Each image hammered the truth deeper into the stunned hall. David straightened his tie again, calm as ever. "For the past 2 hours, you've been humiliating not a pauper, but the man whose investments bankroll 3 of your family's companies, whose signature could erase half your fortunes before dessert is served." The father's face drained of color. His glass trembled in his hand. What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when you mocked me for renting this tuxedo, I already owned the brand stitched inside it. When you shoved me against that pillar, I was the man paying the mortgage on the building your law firm leases downtown. When you poured champagne on me, you wasted the drink from a vineyard I bought 2 years ago." The room was deathly still. David's voice dropped, quiet, but lethal. "And when you laughed at me, you laughed at the man who can destroy you with a phone call." He lifted his phone. One tap, one email. The screen projected his inbox, already drafted messages. "Terminate Langford Holdings credit line. Freeze accounts. Withdraw partnership." The father lurched forward. You wouldn't."
"Oh, I would," David said, his voice cold enough to freeze the air, because tonight wasn't just about your insults. Tonight was about showing Emma exactly who her family is, and you showed her. All eyes turned to Emma, who stood trembling, her bouquet long abandoned on the marble floor. Her mascara had run, but her eyes blazed with something new, not fear, but realization. David turned to her, softening only for her. "Emma, I stayed silent because I wanted to see how far they'd go. I wanted you to see it too. Now you know. You've seen them strip me down, mock me, try to break me, and yet," he spread his arms slightly, his calm unbroken, "here I stand, not broken, stronger, because their hate means nothing against the truth." The mother stumbled forward, desperation cracking her voice. "Emma, don't listen. He's manipulating." "Enough," David snapped, his patience finally gone. The single word echoed, silencing her. "For years you've hidden behind your name, your wealth, your pearls, but tonight you're exposed, not as royalty, not as power, but as bullies." He turned back to the hall, and bullies always forget. The ones they mock might just be the ones holding the leash. The projector shifted again, emails popping up, contracts, balance sheets, names of companies tied to Reed Technologies, names that matched the Langford's own ventures, the cousin's startup, the uncle's chain of restaurants, the father's shipping firm, all stamped with one common note, dependent on Reed funding. The family's faces collapsed in horror. David's smile was small, almost merciful. "Consider tonight your audit." Gasps, whispers. The guests leaned back, watching the once proud family shrink before their eyes. Emma's father finally dropped into his chair, head in his hands. The uncle slumped against the stage, his arrogance leaking out like air from a punctured balloon. The mother's pearls rattled as her hands trembled. David looked out over the room one last time. "You all wanted a speech. Here it is. You mocked the wrong man. You underestimated the wrong groom. And now you will live with the consequences." He set the microphone down with deliberate calm. The sound echoed like a gavel striking. For a long moment, the ballroom was silent. The humiliation that had fueled the evening now hung heavy, but inverted. The laughter was gone. In its place, fear, shame, disbelief. Emma moved then, slowly, deliberately. She walked to David's side, her heels clicking against the marble in a rhythm that filled the quiet hall. She reached for his hand. Her fingers threaded through his, trembling but sure. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. The billionaire groom, mocked, shoved, ridiculed, now stood with his bride by his side. And the family that had tried to bury him beneath scorn found themselves crushed beneath the truth. David leaned to the mic one last time. His voice, quiet but clear, carried through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, dinner is served. But for some of you," he let the pause cut deep, "dessert will be bankruptcy." With that, he stepped away, guiding Emma with him. The room erupted, not in laughter, not in mockery, but in chaos. Phones lit up, reporters surged, Relatives scrambled to salvage reputations already in flames. And at the center of it all, calm and untouchable, David Reed walked out of the ballroom, leaving the Langfords drowning in the ruin of their own arrogance. If you loved this story of revenge, power, and poetic justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more billionaire twist stories that will leave you speechless. Don't forget to like, share, and drop a comment. Tell me what city you're watching from for a chance at the next shoutout. Special shout out to @Gardner Dawson from Minden, LA. Thanks for rocking with us. Stay tuned because the next story will be even bigger.